Hello, my friends. Happy New Year to you all. It's a whole fresh new year that promises to be, as the Chinese say, interesting, I guess. Uh, Probably the most profound one I have said to a number of people, most of the profound one in perhaps human history, or certainly in terms that we understand it. And so a lot of big stuff coming downstream. And I spend a good bit of time sitting here trying to make sense out of where this is all going and how it works. And so I thought I'd spend a little time with you tonight and chat with you a little bit about what that seems like to me. In my business of trying to think about the future, it's very helpful to try to look at the past and say what's happened in the past. It gives indications of what might happen in the future. And the things you're looking for are not so much specifics as much as details, as much as they are patterns and shapes and so on. Where do you get repeatability that you can project out into the future? And decades ago, I figured out, I think it first came from a little Peter Russell book that essentially built the sequence of major changes, paradigm shifts, historical sequential paradigm shifts. Other people have done this as well, but what Peter and others have shown is that there is this regular exponential, essentially, relationship between sequential paradigm shifts. And if you start, and by the way, this is a pattern that exists across almost every domain that we understand, whether it's chemistry or physics or technology or any number of things. If you go back and you look historically at where the big breakthroughs have been, what you find out is that there are very long periods. If you look at it in terms of just life on the planet, you have this single cellular life that is very long, billions of years, and then you have multicellular life, and then you have vertebrates and mammals, and then you go to early human beings, and then who are doing hunter-gatherers, and then you have you have agriculture, and it shows up, and then you move into cities and towns. And I've got two series of slides that I use that you can walk your way through all of those kinds of things. And what you do is you start out as billions of years, and then the next one is millions, hundreds of millions of years or something, 1/10 of the time. And then the next one is 1/10 of that period, and then 1/10 of the 1/10 of the period. And so you have this spiraling kind of vortex kind of relationship that says that these huge kind of changes come faster and faster. And the transition times between those eras become compressed by a factor of 10. And so the transition from single cellular life to multiple cellular life is, hundreds of millions of years or something like that. And the sequence between multiple cellular life and vertebrates or invertebrates or whatever the next one was, then becomes 1/10 of that becomes tens of 100,000 years or something like that, or 10,000, 190,000 years, something. And then the next one becomes 9,000 years. And then the next one becomes it just keeps going 90 years, 900 years, 90 years. Each one becomes 1/10. And each succeeding era has about 10 times the amount of information, complexity, call it what you like. So there's a lot more complexity in a multiple cellular life than single cellular life. And as you move your way down through the sequence, it gets faster and bigger and bigger. So what you've got is something that's going faster and faster and faster and bigger and bigger and bigger. And, the transition times become shorter and shorter and shorter. And you work your way through these kinds of things, and you work your way up to the industrial age, and then you do into computers, and then and suddenly you're into a place where the next big thing happens in about 5 years, and it's just 5 times more than you've ever seen before. It's reflected in also in relationships that are a little more current. And so a good example of that would be that if you follow those projections and you say, oh, the technological change of the last century, what are you likely to see in this century? Well, what you find out is that in the first decade of this century, you would have about 7 to 10 times all of the technological change of the whole century, the 1900s, where you started with, you were in steam trains and you learned you started to fly in 1903, the Wright brothers, and you worked your way finally up into computers and IT and the internet, and supposedly went to the moon and all of that kind of stuff. And you take all of that and you say, in the next 10 years, you're going to get 8 or 9 times that whole century. In the next quarter century out to 2025, it will be something like 30 or 40 times the technological advancement than you'd seen in the whole past. And of course, we're watching that. The stuff that happens now is extraordinary, unexplainable in those kinds of terms. And so to give you another example, and the problem is there's not a problem, but the underlying issue is that at the beginning of each one of these transitions, these extraordinary transitions, there is no indication at all that suggests what the next one is going to look like. The single cellular life did not wake up one morning and decide that this was going to be a big transition into multiple cellular life, and it certainly didn't happen otherwise. I mean, in the Second World War, we were working with mechanical computers, and I was in college studying electrical engineering in the early 60s, and we were soldering individual transistors together in very simplistic circuits. And that was the beginning. We were working pretty close to the edge. I mean, little small devices with multiple transistors and something were just showing up in small packages when I was graduating. We knew about John Bardeen and the other couple of guys who invented the transistor, because it was only like 10 years earlier than that. And it was impossible at that point, looking at the kind of state of the art, to predict that within 20 years you'd be having individual little microprocessors that would have thousands and thousands of transistors, and in another couple of decades you'd have devices that had billions of transistors on a single device, and that all, billions of transistors in a package that was the size of a single transistor back when I was working on it. That's the essence of the rate of change of all this stuff. And the same thing has happened in biotech. Now, if you think about that, they cracked the code and figured out the DNA. All of us remember when that happened, what, 30 or 25, 20 years ago or something, 25, 30 years ago. And then exponentially they get into genetic modification and all kinds of crazy stuff, to say nothing about all these extremely small devices that are all over the place, nanotech. And it's just going like crazy. And what that all says is that, to me at least, is that when we look out into this future, that you've got to assume that we're on the cusp of an extraordinary change that is essentially impossible to predict in the terms that we're familiar with. You can't look around in a sense, in conventional kind of terms, you can't look around at the state of the art and say, well, it's going to be ×3 or ×5, or there's going to be really things. The common approach to trying to make sense out of all of this stuff is extrapolation. Is that you try to figure out, what things have happened in the past and how is it going to keep on going, and you project it out 10 years and you'll say ×10 or whatever it is. It's simplistic analysis compared to the fundamental kind of signature about how things have all happened in the past. It's and so if you have some sense that you're riding this exponential curve and you're into a space and it's going to have faster and faster, and it is not going to look anything like what the past has been, then you really have to open your aperture very wide and start to say and looking for the little weak signals and other subtleties that start to suggest to you what is incoming and what will be the character of this new space. Now, let me say something kind of personally, and what I've come to conclude in my life is the things that show up in my life, certainly individual ones, but particularly when you get a string of stuff or you get a clustering or a series of things, is that for me at least, I immediately start saying, what's this about? Why is this being presented to me? Why, what's the universe trying to tell me about something that I don't know about? And in particular, I think about that in terms of the future. And so as I go along, when some anomaly or some strange thing or something else happens, I capture that and throw that in the back of my brain and set it on a shelf back there, so that I can say, I wonder if that shows up again, then that'll give me some idea about what I just experienced. And what I also do is try to look at the framework, the systemic kind of assessment of how we think we understand things and how they work. Now, because that drives everything downstream. And if your kind of sense of reality, if your paradigm, how you explain reality, doesn't change and isn't modified by this incoming information, then you will not be able to see this new emerging world. And certainly the character of it, and therefore what you need to do in order to prepare and ride the wave into this new reality and this new era. And so there's this kind of ongoing kind of process that looks for little kinds of things and how do they fit into the paradigmatic framework, into the systems model, and keep looking at the model all the time and saying, is this working? Is this right or not? Some indications you can get about the kind of validity or the essential character or validity, I guess, of the model is to decide whether it's in the mainstream, if everybody believes what it is. Because I can promise you that the new world is going to be different. And if everybody thinks that this is the way it's going to be, they're probably wrong, because it's going to be really, really different. And there are not a whole lot of people that can think in those, are open enough and confident enough to kind of walk out into that kind of space and try to make sense out of it. It's very, for many, many people, if not most, it is very hard to go away from what is comfortable and what is familiar and what is the past, and to walk out and try to find and define a new world for themselves. Particularly in this kind of a situation where so many of the fundamentals that have been the case for thousands of years are now up for grabs, like what is truth and what is real, and stuff like that. I just read a projection or read about an interview here where it's 20 years old, where a guy who came out of the system was saying that they've got the capability from satellites to be able to generate imagery in the sky up to like 100,000 feet, and it covers a third of the United States, or that would be able to project and convince people very clearly that there was an alien invasion coming in and this things all move. I mean, if you've ever seen those videos, I think they're in Dubai or something like that, where they were heading these whales jumping out next to this projected and pictured kind of little pond next to these high rise. It was part of the process of kind of celebrating the emergence or the standing up this new high rise. It was absolutely, I mean, you sat there and you watched these whales jumping up into the sky and crashing into this artificial kind of pond that was right in front of you, and it was just very, very compelling. And then you think about the other kinds of things that have happened in the last few years. You remember in Norway where that big thing was in the sky with that spiraling thing? Nobody could figure out what it was. Maybe they're just testing this thing from from their satellites. But in any case, the very fundamentals of how we understand reality are being questioned. So, like I said, I sit there and look at the stuff that show up in my life, and I think there's some external direction, call it whatever you'd like. The universe is giving me these things to look at, trying and essentially saying, what do you think of that? What do you think of that? You know, and they keep making it bigger and more complex as we go along. And so I'm an engineer, of course, and so I'm kind of educationally locked into a framework that is a byproduct of my education and this common understanding about how this reality all works. And I can get outside of the box pretty far compared to a lot of people. But it's it's all kind of at some level anchored, there's tethered back down into that kind of structural understanding about how this stuff works, physics and chemistry and all those kinds of things. And then there was a time, decade ago or so when I started finding out, it was a little more than that, 20 years maybe, where with some experiences with hallucinogenic substances that there was really quite a different world out there that I had never even thought about. And just the fact that you experience one of those things, if you're thoughtful at all about it, makes you just back up and say, wait a second, what else is there that happening that I don't know anything about, that I didn't know anything about, that I haven't factored into this framework of about how things work. And so the universe drove me through and led me through a whole series of experiences like that, including going to India with, avatars and all kinds of things that were all pushing things out, but it still was conventional enough that I could describe it to you and you would logically understand it. It might be a little far out. It might be not to your taste. It might be seems a little crazy, but it was enough that you could understand it. And then what I've had happen in the last year is something really quite fascinating that's driven me into a whole different kind of space. And I grew up in a very conservative, not conventional perhaps, but conservative background, very religious background, Protestant religion, and in the Midwest, in Omaha, Nebraska. And our life revolved around the Bible and church and trying to evangelize as many people as they wanted us to about hell and heaven and all those kinds of things. And in that framework, there were these components, let's call it. And part of the components were that there were angels and there were devils and all those kinds of things, but they were all cartoonish, right? They were like cartoons. the little guy on your shoulder that's whispering in your ear and telling you to do this or not do that, and so on. And it was really, it was there. You knew about it. You read about angels showing up in the Bible and doing tricky things. But it was all really kind of cartoonish. It was didn't make any sense in terms of any of what you were heard about or studied or went the more you went to college and so on. There were no courses on angels in the engineering curriculum. And it was just it was that stuff. And I'd never heard or seen it. When I got into college, I started reading, getting exposed to a number of not many, just maybe one or two books. One was Carlos Castaneda's, and the whole uh, teachings of Don Juan, Yaqui way of knowledge. They were amazing. They just opened this kind of notion and said there's a whole other dimensional thing going on out there. And you know what? My conservative religious kind of things maybe kind of cringe at the whole thing because there was a place out there where you go off the cliff and end up in hell or something, and you really didn't want to mess around too much in that space at all. But it was really quite interesting. And then about 20 years ago or so, I got a whole lot of the videos, the audiobooks of Don Juan, of Carlos Castaneda's, and I used to listen to him all the time. And I was always looking for the ideas and the concepts and the stuff that would help me, make more sense and, be a better person and such. But it was still kind of abstract. It was conceptual. After all, I mean, is this real or is it a novel, right? Is this fiction or is it a novel? I mean, there's a lot of questions about the sources of Carlos Castaneda's, and there's a lot of criticisms about him in his past and so on. And so you don't know whether he's made this stuff up or he really was sitting in the library in UCLA, or whether he really went down across the border to Mexico and saw all this kind of stuff. So yeah, you get the ideas, and they're interesting, and so on. And then, as I said, I went to this space where, with a little help from my friends, that you are opened up into this whole other dimensional space, and you say, God, and they warned me before some of these experiences. First one was with a university setting. There are entities and demonic kind of things that might show up, and here's how you deal with them and such. And they were kind of supposed to be representative of the emotional kind of stuff that you've got inside of you. And so that's all psychological kind of thing. It says that you get in touch with yourself in these extraordinary kind of ways, but it doesn't say, in a sense, how all of this reality works. And then last year, about this time, I had some experiences done in Mexico, which I have communicated to many of you, where I worked with a gentleman down there who I don't know what he was, but he wasn't from here. And it was influenced by little mushrooms, not much. And I saw a demon. I watched in front of my eyes as the reality of this man's face and everything and the composition of his thing changed in front of my eyes to where I saw what he described, and I would certainly concur, it looked like a demon. And he explained to me that they're all over the place, and spiders and snakes and who knows, dragons, and they all exist in this reality and other kind of dimensional areas, and you can't see them usually, but they all play important kind of roles. And the devil controls the whole space, and it's the derivative of historical things that happened long ago. And it just, I mean, it was 4 days. I was 4 days just trying to say, what in the frickin' world is this all about? I have never seen anything like that before. And again, I go back and say, why are you doing this to me, huh? What is this about? What am I supposed to learn from this? What does this tell me more about? And to start with, it just says reality is not the way you think it is. And there are forces and entities and such that are in play, actively in play here, that are integral to the way it all works, but it's been masked before you. All right, so then over the last few years, it's become apparent to me that humanity and human life on this planet has been systematically conditioned over decades, if not centuries, but certainly many decades in the terms that we're kind of presently aware of or obviously aware of, to change the essence of who human beings are. And in obvious terms, they're messing with the air, they're messing with the water, they're messing with the electromagnetic spectrum, they're messing with the food, they're messing with they're doing COVID shots, they're doing everything. There's this systematic kind of very sophisticated, very well funded, orchestrated kind of effort at some level that that we're not aware of to control and drive and characterize the essential nature of human life on this planet. I mean, this is a really big thing. I mean, there wasn't this stuff going on when I was a kid. I mean, I remember when television first showed up, and they weren't doing subliminal messaging in television back then. It was just the Mickey Mouse Club, right? And but now then I read just 2 days ago about this new movie that this Netflix movie that the Obamas have put some money into and working on. And somebody downloaded the thing and opened it up and said there's a fourth audio channel that's in that movie, and what it's generating is these emotional very low frequency kind of signals at various times within the film, and it's obviously that and it's trying to generate fear. And you say, and and it just confirms the fact that this is a very broad spectrum attempt to, in every way possible, to constrain and control humanity and drive you down into the space of ultimately technological control. And so then you start to couple some of these things together, and you say, well, who's orchestrating all of this and such, and how does this all work? Well, we had a transition talk speaker, Mark Savage, who came in, I think it was December. And Mark Savage came and talked about egregores. Now, that was a term I had never heard before I stumbled onto Mark Savage. And Mark Savage, who has heads up and founded an organization about hermetic teaching, has been very much involved in those kinds of things. One could argue he's probably one of the experts on the planet on the film. Came here and explained to us that there are these other dimensional entities that arise around groups of people who have common interests and strong emotional attachment. Think baseball team or religion or national identity of a country or or a family kind of thing or whatever. But there is essentially a other dimensional kind of intelligence, a force that's in play that provides the tentacles, the threads, the controlling, the cross networking kind of network connections in that hold these groups together and feed them, generate, and I don't know if they exactly generate, but in any case, it's the reason why a club works. Why? Because you got all people with like-minded interests, or a Masons, or or anything. I particularly thought about it. I had gone to a baseball game, a professional baseball game in Washington, sat there and watched 25,000 people, all just the energy and it was, they knew everything. They were so excited. They were just hanging on this. Well, I remember when I was a whole lot younger, I used to be interested in football and baseball, but I never thought about it. Here, I thought about it and I said, God, what is going on? What, at a really structural, fundamental level is going on here that ties all this together? I used to own an advertising agency. I know a little bit about how you kind of the devices and the mechanisms and the ways in which you get people to change their behavior and so on. But this is a whole lot more than that. This is this emotional attachment, and this starts wars and fights, and it also does good things with groups that are really all interested in trying to make the world better. Parenthetically, I think we need to do one of those for a new world, and find a new one. But anyway, that again was something that you just set you back and say, wait a second, there's something going on here at a higher level. We've been playing in the shadows here, and we really haven't been seeing the literal stuff, that the big things that are going on. And I'm reading a book right now from about Paul Levy, and he talks about Wetiko. Now, I read an earlier book a couple of years ago, one of his earlier books, and what he talks about is with this again other dimensional entity that the Native Americans, all of them, and every kind of group or tribe, all had their own version, a different kind of name for the same thing. And what he argues is that, all over the planet, indigenous groups had identified this. And that is that there is this mind virus called Wetiko. The Native Americans called it Wetiko, and that it drove the most negative aspects of the human nature, and that it convinced humans about acquisition and things and fighting and such. I haven't gotten all the way through the book, and so I can't really be very articulate about it, except to say that it is not the same thing as an egregore, but it operates in the same kind of space. And so now what I've got going is a parallel space that's got these demons that came in, and the egregores and the Watikos and stuff, and you're starting to say, and that then feeds the questions that you start to generate, saying, what in the world is going on, and why is this going the way that it's going? Because it makes no sense in conventional terms. The whole notion of what is reality, what is truth, all of those kinds of things are going up in smoke, seemingly. And you have to ask yourself, you don't, but I do, why is this happening? What's driving this? It makes no sense to collapse the whole global economy. It makes, what do you do? There's something bigger. There's something somewhere else that is driving this whole thing. Why do you want to start these wars? Why do you want to drive us into a third world war? What is this? This is irrational in human terms, in terms of the interests of humanity. It makes no sense. And then, if any of you have followed David Icke, you know that David Icke's been talking about this kind of stuff, or a variation of this kind of stuff, for a long time. And what David Icke has been talking about is these reptilians, and he's saying that there are these spirit entities, call them archons or jinn, or they're reptilians or whatever, and they exist in another dimension in this reality, and they believe that they have a self-interest in kind of controlling the space. Maybe they're behind the technology, maybe there's something higher than that. I don't know, but he has been saying for a long time, with a great deal of generating a great deal of criticism in the process, that these reptilian kinds of entities have integrated themselves into very high levels on this planet, and they essentially control a great deal of what's how we all operate. This guy I saw down in Mexico said the same thing. He said that the space is largely controlled by the devil, and the subordinates to the devil, which is, I'm not prepared to allow to suggest that certainly is not the inevitable kind of situation here, because I think there's a certain light at the end of the tunnel. But in any case, David Icke has talked about that. And David Icke in particular has kind of pinged on the royal family in the UK, saying that in fact that they are literally reptilian, and he talks about Big George Bush and others all being in these entities that have shapeshift, and they operate in this dimension and human kind of visual characteristics, and then they can change their shape. It was so weird. I mean, and like I said, I mean, he just took all kinds of flack for that, because it's just kind of so weird kind of stuff. And then the other day, I saw a video that was derived from I think it was the personal secretary of Princess Diana, who was communicating the experiences that she had with what Diana had explained to her about how things worked in whichever castle they lived in over there, and this woman said that they literally shapeshift. They have these ceremonies, and they get together and they shapeshift and become these reptilian beings, and they feed on human beings, literally. And I won't go into the details of that, but it's rather horrific. Which is not something that I had not heard about tangentially, and that, the pedophilia stuff and all of these things, and the fact that there have been studies, all kinds of things that suggest that there are entities, archons, that in jinn and so on. I mean, in the Quran, I had a Muslim woman who worked for me, and she explained to me that there's a whole book in the Quran all about jinn, archons, and the fact that there's all these entities that all operate another dimensionally here, and that that's the way it is, and you just kind of you got to deal with it. The point here is that I'm trying to make is that number one, we're at the breach of, or in the process of going into a whole new world, that one of these exponential paradigm shifts, and it is by definition fundamentally different than, from our point of view, than what we've understood in the past. Okay, so there's a really strange world coming up in it. And it is, and many, including myself, have suggested this is really fundamental and structural, and there's two paths. One is this technocracy path, and the path of technology that was trying to control everyone, put them into a place where, in a matrix-like situation, that you are just providing the energy. By the way, the Gnostic Gospels and all of the fundamental sources that talk about the archons all say that they feed off of the negative energy that comes from fear and pain and warfare and all these kinds of things, and anger. And that, in fact, is what sustains them in this space. David Wilcock, for what it's worth, suggests that if we would all be, everybody would be happy on the planet for one day, it would kill all of the archons and all of these other dimensional kind of entities. So the point I'm trying to make here is that, to me at least, what's emerging is this broadened kind of notion of how this reality works that suggests that these other there are other dimensional forces in play and entities in play. They're an integral part of this transition and are fundamental players in the evolutionary shift of humanity. That in fact that the core, the basic kind of essential characterization or essence of the split between these two tracks, to technocracy and off to personal development and the new human, has to do with how we effectively deal with it, come to grips with and deal with this other dimensional kind of space and the intelligent entities that are in there. Because I told you, I grew up memorizing whole books of the Bible and all that kind of stuff. And there is a biblical verse that says, you deal not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers. And that is a simple kind of definition or description, it seems to me, of our job and this reality and what we've got to rise to, as I can think of, that says this is not about economies, and this is not about politics, and this is not about, energy and all that kind of stuff. It is about, there is a different level of activity and intelligence and set of objectives and so on. And we are all being rapidly exposed to and shown about these kinds of things, the purpose of which is to allow us to be knowledgeable enough to rise to the occasion, change who we are, to decide where we're going, and whatever else we have to do in order to break that whole kind of track, or at least allow us to go off onto a new track. It's a really, really deep and structural for me, because it keeps getting reinforced, as I've suggested, from different kind of experiences that I've had and others that I really can't talk about right here. And all of which say that that this is a far different world. And what comes out of the back end of this thing, I mean, just think of the throwaway thing I just said about David Wilcock. I mean, if you get an isolated, contained, isolated, defined kind of space where people are not fearful, people are not suffering, they're not angry, they're not, if you do that, you could have 1,000 years of peace. You could have 10,000, 15,000 years of peace, like Cryon says. Because there would be nobody out trying to start wars, because you'd have wiped out all of that kind of stuff. There are all kinds of interesting kind of variations about how that might happen and so on. Maybe we can talk about it later, but this is really big, very, for me, very interesting kind of things. And I thought you might find it similarly of interest. So thank you very much.